Shalom Aleichem. It's a great pleasure to have with us my dear friend, Reb Shimon Shimonovich, the Roish Machain Ale Zayas, and the Rav of Pine River Village, Nusach Sfard. And for me, a very dear friend because he has published so far all of my Sfarim. So it's a Kesher Shel Kayama, Baruch Hashem, and a relationship I cherish very much. And over the last couple of years, Baruch Hashem, Ali Zayas has really taken off as one of the premier publishing houses in Klal Yisrael. So, Hatzlacha in your continued Avodas HaKodesh.
Thank you very much. Amen. This is our second formal meeting. Our first meeting, if I remember correctly, we met in the library of Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim.
Yeah.
I still remember going down special to meet Rabbi Glatstein. It was one of the most exciting days in my life, and starting out more in the infancy of Machain Ali Zayas, that I had this chus that somebody so famous and so important was interested in publishing a sefer with us. And Baruch Hashem, that meeting was very fruitful, and we produced many sefarim together. Most recently is the sefer Birchas Hatzaddik, which I believe we came to discuss today.
Yes. So it's actually, I think it's significant that we're speaking about this today because just yesterday, a great Rosh Yeshiva who has become very associated with this sefer marked the upshare of the miracle baby. It was just yesterday, so people's interest in the sefer has again been sparked. But we'll get to the supernatural aspects of the sefer. Let's first talk about the publication. I know you print many Sfarim. Most Sfarim probably don't look like the Birchas Hatzaddik. So, from your vantage point, how's the publication of this sefer? How does it compare to the typical Ale Zayas project?
Okay, so before I answer that, I want to just comment about why it's a very opportune time to talk about it right now. It happens to be that I was the toldest of Birchas Hatzaddik. It mentions that the Tzaddik of Rananna, Rabbi Hoberman, was actually born on Shavuos. So it's pretty much his birthday right now.
Yeah, perfect.
His bris would have been, I guess, in the on this Shabbos would have been the Yom HaBris. So that's so you do it from the Chuvas Galia Masechta, in the Jerusalem of the Galia Masechta. He asks an amazing kasha. He says, how could it be that Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who was a tzaddik Tomim, shouldn't have been nifta the day he was born? Because he made tzaddik. So he says that the answer is that Reb Chaim Volozhiner was actually nifter the day of his bris, and therefore the shleimus of a person is by his bris. So that's really when his birthday is. I Moshe Rabbeinu. Right. Moshe Rabbeinu is not with Mol. Zayin Ada. I'm saying so. We're somewhere between his two birthdays right now. He was born on Shavuos, and now that we're on Yom Chamishi of Parshas Naso, so this Shabbos would be his Yom HaBris. So maybe Friday would be his Yom HaBris. I'm not sure if it was the first day Shavuos or the second day Shavuos. That's also a good reason why it's a good time to talk about it. So you started out with the most pneumistic Inyan and the most chitzonistic Inyan of the sefer. He started out alluding to the segula aspect of the sefer, which, even though we discussed before if you're going to provoke me about that or not, but it looks like that we're going to get to that eventually. Have our little debate, over a friendly debate, of course, over the inyan of the segula in the sefer, and in general about segulas. But regarding this, the chitzonis of the sefer, so nobody like Rabbi Glatstein believes in the cliche of judging a book by its cover, and all the projects that are done for you are very geschmack and very teichendig and mole teichen, but there's something that's a special dagesh you put on the packaging, the kavod HaTorah shaboy. It says that kaisav sefer Torah noah, kulmis noah, the karchay b'shiroyim noim. So the Briskerov says that that's not a hiddur mitzvah in Torah, it's a hiddur mitzvah in kavod HaTorah. You're supposed to kavod HaTorah, and then it's a hiddur mitzvah. So that hiddur mitzvah you do in a beautiful, beautiful way. I happen to have, because I suspect I'll be talking with the sefer, I happen to have a copy with me over here. And so it's something unique. First of all, it's very special material. The cover is made out of, it's reconstituted leather. That's what the cover is made out of, which is not your typical sefer. Typical sefer is just a cardboard with like a synthetic material on top of it and stamping. This is actually really leather. It's reconstituted leather, but it's beautifully, beautifully done. And and you felt, and even though we all use Svarim, you made sure that the cover is something unique. But this sefer particularly, you put a dagish on that because I guess all the other Svarim weren't your own Svarim. This sefer is a sefer of a tzaddik, which I saw. You're right that there's actually he was Mamish gave your family the responsibility to publish this Svarim. You write in the Agdama that he asked your listeners might already know the family connection, but there's a deep family connection over here. Your Elta Zayda was the Rav in Sachachov, and he was also in Sachachov, a Talmud of the Shem Shmuel, and there was a real family connection. And he actually asked your family to see to it that his Svarim get printed, and you're actually fulfilling that tzava of his. That's really something amazing. He was nifter in Lamed Zayin in 77. Right now we're almost 50 years later, and you're actually going and doing kind that tzava. It's a very beautiful thing.
So I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. I remember I called your team specially that in the Sharblat they need to add 2 specific words in the Sharblat that they did, and I'm very proud of these words. After Rabbeinu Yitzchak Hakohen Hoberman said it says Talmud Sachachav. That I made sure to put in there
to bring together the family connection. Yeah. I mean, he was the Talmud of others as well.
Yeah,
he was connected to he was a Bulgaria Talmud, a Talmud of the great Goyen or Sheshiva in Bulgaria. What was that? Ramach Bulgaria? What was his name?
Yeah, Mordechai Yaakov Bulgaria.
Yaakov Bulgaria was a big Goyen, and he also had a connection with Chabad and with the Riyats. He actually signs one of he signs one of his letters Hatomim, because they were the time Chetmim, was the Tmimim, the Albabach Chosted, especially the Bnei Torah were called the Tmimim. Mm-hmm. He signed his name Hatomim, and he also had a very strong connection to Ger, the Uriyemis, and later the base Yisrael. But his first Rebbe, I guess, was the Shem Shmuel of Sachachov, who was the son of the Avnei Nezer, and he had a very deep family connection. There's a connection over there.
Yeah. My Zayda learned with him by the Shem Yishmael. They were chavrusas when they learned by the Shem Yishmael.
Your Zayda or Elta Zayda?
My Elta Zayda. My great-grandfather. The last Rav of Sachachov learned with the Tzaddik of Rananna. In fact, recently I found, since the sefer has gone to print, I found a letter that my grandfather wrote to Reb Shlomo David Kahana. In it, my grandfather said that the Sachachov Rav gave all of his ksavim to the Tzaddik of Rananna when the Tzaddik of Rananna escaped Warsaw to go to Siberia. And the letter says that the Tzaddik of Rananna somehow got it back to him, but we're not in possession of it. So we're still looking for that. Yeah.
We're still looking. Yeah, I guess at one point they gave it back to him. Interesting. There's a very interesting story that's brought down in the introduction of what the Nazis did to him. And this can maybe go back to our discussion about the supernatural abilities of the sefer. There's 2 stories that are mentioned in the introduction in the Talmud, which to me the second story resonates more than the first story, and that both beautiful stories. And this just some people connect more to the element of the supernatural element of things. Some people it resonates more something which the Mesiras Nefesh of it. The first story is he writes how the Nazis threw him into a pit, and they were going to throw a dead horse on him, which was going to kill him because he had survived the first fall, and they were going to put him to death. And the people were pleading with the Nazis not to do it. And finally, a nace happened, and while they were back and forth with the Germans trying to get them not to kill the rabbi, the Rav, some superior captain or something came over to the Nazis, said, "We got to go, fight the Polacks now. Why are you busy with these Jews?" And they all disappeared, and he was saved. So he says, very nice taich. He says that he understood that the reason why Hashem saved him was to daven for Klal Yisrael. And he said, that's shot in the pasuk, Hashem halisa min oisi min sha'oil. Halisa oisi, you brought me out min sha'oil in order I should be a shoylich zaldaina better. I should live to be able to vakish on Klal Yisrael, which is a beautiful story. Also shows you how he felt his life mission. He was a goyin oilam. He was, after the war, he was. You mentioned it also, and they told us that he was involved in Bimatra Gunas, but in a separate project, Michal Azais was involved in from someone who was also very active in post-war period in Bimatra Gunas and everything. A Choshev Arov in one of the DP camps. We have a letter where he's also in corresponding with the Tzaddik of Rananna about Heter Gunas after the war. Yes. It came up in a different project. That letter came up.
Really?
Which shows how.
You have his name? What's the?
It's a
whatever. It's an up and coming project.
when it comes out, will be in his gal. But it's fascinating how we're talking about a person who was the Matra Kunis after the war, and he felt his mission after the war was more to be a better for Klal Yisrael. He became like more, let's say, Tzaddik of Rananna, not known as the Goin of Rananna, even though he certainly was a Goin Olam. You see from all his writings, clearly he had this total shlita in all of Torah. But there's another story here that to me resonates even more. It's my personal feeling. Obviously, everyone can have every person should find what he finds in the sefer. He says that during the war, he was taking the forced labor, and he was being forced to work on Shabbos. So he did an unbelievable thing. He went and cut off a piece of his finger, so that in order that he should be, like incapacitated, he shouldn't be able to go and work on Shabbos. Now he was a kohen, so he says, "Meheri yibana beis hamikdash." The beis hamikdash is going to be built, and I, being a kohen, will be a balmum because I cut off my finger. Right? The thing. And he said that he'll cut off his finger, and I won't be able to avoid it. I would rather be possible to avoid the Beis Hamikdash and not be Mechal one Shabbos. That's a brisker Maisa. Again, I'm not getting into halacha. That's what a person has to do. But the idea that you're willing to give up, he was a kohen, and he certainly was the kind of person that believed that Meher Yibana Beis Hamikdash, and he was striving to avoid the Beis
You
Hamikdash.
see, he was concerned. He brings up the possibility, Meher Yibana. He was thinking
Yeah.
that way.
And he says, I'm going to give that up to Michal. It reminds me of another story, it's also a Hasidic story in a certain way, of like, you're able to give up your Olam Haba, not your Olam Haza, just for Shmiras HaMitzvah and Avodas Hashem. My name is Hillel. My name is Hillel Shimon, but my first name Hillel, I'm named after the Krasner Rov, the Baal Kavanas Alev. He also was very active in Heter Agunis after the war, in Fehrenwald. He was actually Mamish also Min HaShemayim. He was the aid before the war by the Shamloy Rov. The Shamloy Rav had told him before the war, learn Hagunis, learn Sugi Hagunis, coming. It'll be useful one day. And sure enough, after the war, he was one of the most active Matra Hagunis. He wrote a whole sefer Rani Akara, where he goes to many Heter Hagunis. There was another Rebbe, I can say who it is, the Kloizer Garov. He was in Yirei Hayro. He was afraid every other area in halacha, if you paskin wrong, it usually doesn't come back to haunt you. Right? It's not Baharuk Baraglov. Agun is the most scariest thing for a Rav to paskin, because there could be a Baharuk Baraglov, and then your psak is not going to help you much. If I can digress, it reminds me of another story. If you allow me to, unrelated to this, I can get back to that in a minute. But the Krasner Rav told the Kloizer Magrov, let's go, let's make Yeshiva's best when everyone's memory is fresh and be Mat Agunis. Kloizer Rav says he's afraid. He's afraid. He was a going oil, he had no problem doing it. So the Krasner Rav says, what are you afraid? That's going to be Baharuk Baraglov, and it'll show that you paskin wrong. He said, ich bin gerät sich anzutan der Gartel, na reintanzen in fire from Gehennem, to raten jüdische Töchter. I'm willing to put on my gartel, jump into the fire of Gehennem. It's a little, if what does Hashem want you to do? The idea is, I'm going to give up all my Olam Haba just to do the right thing. And here's a person that to me, this story was amazing, that he was willing to say, I'll be hostile from being a kind of Beis Hamikdash in order I should be able to not be Michal Shabbos. I thought it's an amazing story. Can I say the other thing? The other thing about the Heter Agunis?
Sure.
There's somebody told me, very interesting story. Just to remind me, when I was saying this story, somebody told me that there was I happen to remember him. As a kid, I learned in Shivach Sansai from Borough Park, and there was an older Yid, Villiger. He was a Shluchot Rabban of Parvadat Yeshiva. And he would come with an 8 already at the end of his life. He was, today, the more people live, you have his day to live very long, right?
My grandfather, the son-in-law of the Sochava, lived to 106. Yeah,
106. That's unbelievable. That's very highly uncommon. And what's interesting is, I once met your father. He told me that his grandfather was nifter so long ago. He was nifter during the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
Spanish flu.
1917.
That means your father, the Wein Gesund Stark, had a grandfather who was nifter during the Spanish flu. He said that his own father, who you're talking about, the one who lived so long, said Kaddish for his father for how many years?
90 years.
Almost 100. That's an unbelievable story.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's amazing. That's unbelievable. But this Rav Villiger was, I don't know how old he was, but then it was not so common to see such old men, and he was a very old man. They called him the Sabbath Kadisha. He was a Talmud of the Atzichaim. The Atzichaim was the brother of Rav Yoilish, the Tzaddik Rav. And he made, those days, Lakewood wasn't what Lakewood is today. Lakewood was more like a resort town. It was more of a vacation place, a place where people went to make a simcha. So Rabbi Williger made an oifruf in Lakewood, like an hotel in Lakewood. And being that he was a mashulach for the Tarvadas Yeshiva, and he paved the way in America for people to be able to have the concept of Gemara Yeshivas, so Aaron Kotler had a hakaras toy for him that he was that even though he was going for Tarvadas, but it helped Lakewood as well. So he made a simcha. Rabbi came to the simcha. No, so this is very interesting. What type of sichas chulin does Rabbi Kotler have? He comes to simcha. He meets a Hungarian yid, and what conversation? He says, "Oh, you're Talmud Atzichaim. Tell me about your Rebbe's derech halimud." This is what Rabbi wanted to know from this Rabbi Williger. So Rabbi Williger told him, "I'll tell you this much." He says, "The Rosh Hashiva says a shir. You ask a kasha, you bring a shver Rambam, shver Rashba." You have a chat in the Rashba, and you go back to end for the Rambam, and so on and so forth. A huge binyan, a huge share. Says, so what's going to happen? Someone's going to have a kasha on your last yisoid. Okay, so your last yisoid is not so good, but the Rashba's kasha in the Rashba is still a good kasha. The teretz is a good teretz, and you're not that much at risk. He says, my Rebbe wrote Shuvas LaHalacha, and he was matir aguneth. So the aguneth comes back, the whole thing is over. That's the difference. Even though Rabbi Kotler himself is also a great paisik, but it's just interesting how this is what he told Rabbi is the chiluk between the two. But the Tzaddik of Rananna was a great matragunis, no question about that.
In fact, the person who published Shas Tshuvas Nechama Shleima, Rav Shlomo David Kahana, his name is Yitzchak Naiman from Bnei Brak. He also wrote something on the Tzaddik of Rananna. He says he has a letter that Rav Shlomo David Kahana wrote back and forth to the Tzaddik Rananna, and Tzaddik Rananna maybe was in the DP camp in Wexler, and
Yes.
Rosh David Kahana said, "You're telling me this without any svarim. How did you just write this to me?" So he had command of Shas and Poskim without any svarim. That was his level of Yediyah and Shas and Poskim.
Absolutely, which served him well, but created a challenge from Chaim Al Zayis. It served him well because later on in his life, he lost his vision. As a matter of fact, I was looking, once we're going to talk about the sefer, I said, let me look at least the Parshas Nosei, this week's Parsha, what he says. I noticed something very interesting. He has something autobiographical, actually, in Parshas Nosei. He says, what's the pshat? That it says, Nosei is roish b'nei Gershon gam heim. So he says, what's the pshat in the Bnei? He says, Bnei Gershon gam heim. So it brings the Sfarim HaKadoshim that the Bnei Gershon, the taich of Bnei Gershon, al derech remez a musar, is someone who feels like distant. He's nisgarish. He's like chased away. And he says, tzaddikim gedolim, even though they're really very close to Hashem, but because of the great humility, they feel like they're very far away from Hashem. And he says, that's the pshat, because it says by David HaMelech that ki gershuni hayoim mistapeach benachlas Hashem. And he says it could be that because by Matan Torah everyone was healed. It says there was no people who weren't blind. There weren't any people who couldn't. There were no people who were deaf. And he says in Sfarim HaKadoshim that any physical mum, any physical blemish, is testimony to some kind of ruchni, is some kind of spiritual blemish, and that's why the Bali Mumin are not able to avoid the Mizbeach, whether it's Ben Adam, Ben Behema. That's why this week, Parshas Nosei, the week of Yom Tov of Kabbalah Torah, the Oiris of Matan Torah are always awakened, and they bring a refuah for all Bali Mumin, the Ruchnius and the Gashmius. And he adds, Yirotson Shegam Li Yishlach Hashem Yisborach Tekiv Refuah Shalema Al Kihiyoin Dema V'Che'evenoyim. I want that Hashem shall heal my blindness. And he says that's the pshat in Gam Heim. Even tzaddikim gemurim that are really close to Hashem, they feel that they're really b'pchinas meheim, which is oisi yismo v'nachnu mo, and even they should also be masig the orbit esefes meruba ki gam riboyu. So nice. First of all, there's the classic Hasidic teaching of humility of the tzaddik, despite he being knowing that he's a tzaddik, he feels distant and he feels small and he feels v'nachnu mo. What am I? That's a classic Hasidic musar lesson. But there's something also autobiographical over here. The fact that he talks about his blindness, and he said he wants it. So the fact that he was that he couldn't see, but he remembered everything, helped him a lot. But it caused a lot of trouble for us because he quotes people and svarim that we simply could not locate and not identify who they are. Even in this parasha, he still quotes a sefer Aleph Vav Tzadi Ches.
I'm going to go 1 second. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. I'm happy that you brought up this piece because my upcoming work, don't let it out of the bag, but is something called Davar Yafa B'Itai, connecting each parsha to the Zman Hashana. So now I have another piece to add to it. This piece that B'nai Gershon Gamhin is connection to Kabbalah Torah. So your work just got increased But in the sefer Davar Yafa Be'ita, I'm gonna have to add this to Parshas Nasai. And
Very
on
good.
the on
Very
and
good.
on the point that you mentioned that he couldn't see, I bring a story in the Toldos. When he met my father for the first time, he told him in Gansam Ein Lech, he said, "You look like you're, So my father remembers he couldn't see, but he was able to see right through you.
That's interesting. It reminds me, my father used to spend time with the daughter of the Chafetz Chaim. He used to eat by one of the Chafetz Chaim's grandsons, and every fourth week, the Chafetz Chaim's daughter would eat together with them. And she couldn't hear. And he would say stories sometimes about the Chavetz Chaim, and then she would say afterwards, "Mein Jun hat a sehr guten Zikaron." He has such a good memory. He remembers things that never happened. And he would say, "Mame, du hörst nicht. I thought you don't hear." She said, "Der Tate zechrein levracha mir eis gelernt, nor hören was man darf hören. I only hear what I need to hear." That's what it's like.
That's very good.
Yeah. Maybe he felt that when Mashiach will come or through the Koich of Torah, he'll be healed from his other mum as well, from his finger. Who knows?
Okay, we're gonna come back to this piece for another reason, if we have the bravery to discuss the topic of the Segulais. Because this piece is actually very telling.
That he has the so there is one element of the segula. You're talking about the segula, the fact that he had no children and he made a sefer. Now the idea that you're right that he called it Ben LaOshri because his father was Usher, and yet I also think that Ben LaOshri was his way of saying it's a child for me because he had no children, so this is his child. The sefer Isla Petterberger wrote a sefer Pri Yitzchak because he had no children at the time, and he gave a name Pri Yitzchak. There should be there should be something left of Yitzchak. A sefer is a way of eternalizing a person, of leaving some nitzchias in this world, and that I would imagine that was his intention. Also by saying Ben LaOshri, there is a Ben LaOshri. There's something here. My Torah, my legacy remains in his chedushay Torah.
Well, I'm going to tell you something that you're going to like for your work in general, not just my sefarim. When I went on a trip to Morocco, so I did a lot of research about a lot of the tzaddikim.
I think I'm the only person who hadn't gone on a trip to Morocco.
Yeah. But
Okay.
You're doing more than that. You'll hear for a second. So I'm looking at the names of all these tzaddikim. I'm pretty familiar with Rabbanim throughout the ages. You have a list of 10,000 tzaddikim. Maybe you heard of like a couple of them. I actually have a book. The biggest book I have is Matseves Marrakesh, which is a book like the telephone book, just of the Rabbanim buried in one of the cities in Morocco. So in the Hakdama there, from the son Rav Yaakov Hillel, he says the only rabbi that anyone really has heard of from Morocco is Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. Okay,
wasn't the Rif also from Morocco?
Yeah, there are a handful of others that we've heard of, but
was the Rif totally forgotten?
No. I'm saying I agree. It's just most of them really people have not heard of. Okay, so he says, and the only reason people heard of the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh because en route to Eretz Yisrael he stopped off in Livorno, and he sent his folios to Venice, and he published the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh. So because of the Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, because it was published, people know who he was. But the printing press never made it to North Africa. So all the thousands of tzaddik in Morocco never had the opportunity really to publish, and because of that, nobody ever heard of them. So, what you're doing, printing Sfarim for people, it's mamish mechayim esim. You're giving dozens, hundreds of Talmid Chachamim the opportunity to, eternalize, memorialize their Torahs.
Very interesting. It's very interesting. I never realized that because in Morocco they didn't have such access to printing, so that's why they're. But Ohr HaChaim was not just famous for Sefer Ohr HaChaim.
He has
Rabbi
many
Akiva actually refers to the Ohr HaChaim as the Sefer Ohr HaChaim says the Pri Toya bePirushay ala Torah. The Pri Toya bePirushay ala Torah. That's the way the Rabbi Akiva refers to it. You know him as the Pri Toya. The Pri Toya itself was an amazing piece of work.
Yeah.
But that's fascinating that the things that weren't published got lost. I mean, we just involved recently in Mechayin Al-Azaz. We just put out Rav Sadia going on Vayikra. Did you get a copy? You
Not
saw
yet.
it? That's an amazing piece of work, and that was also something which was lost because it was in Judeo-Arabic, so it was in the Geniza, and there was no people didn't read that. Didn't know how to read that language, so it got lost to oblivion. But now that it was translated, you bring it back to people, so it's it's both making things accessible. We also even adding the kudus makes things more accessible. When I used to think that I'll even say when I thought about it, when the art school came out with their the Krois Gedolos Chumash with Nakudas, little dumbfounded. I said, what's going on over here? If I don't understand Ramban without the Nakudas is not going to solve my problem.
Yeah.
In other words, if people on that level, and here also, a lot of the Torah here is a high level Torah. So how's Nakudas helping anybody? And I realize it's not true. There's a part of your brain, as smart as you are and as much as you know, that has to put in another little bit effort to be able to actually think of the vocalization of the words and how to read the words. The fact that you put in a kudus and it reads quicker, you understand it quicker. It's another thing that makes you're avoiding. That's why it's good to have nice square letters. People say who can't read Rashi. If you don't know how to read Rashi letters, you can't understand the Birchas Hatzaddik, the Ben Lashri. But these are all things that makes it more accessible, easier to read, easy to understand. And it's something you insisted on, and I have to admit that you were right about that.
It happens,
But that I admit, or that you're right.
Both of those happen. One of them happens more frequently than the other, but we'll leave it at that.
But the segula part,
yeah.
So that's something which I don't really understand. Again, maybe you have a reason I don't see how a person doesn't have any children, so you're going to go and learn his Torah, so you'll have. I don't exactly get the connections over there. I really get that. Then if you say that Rabbi Shloski said so, who might argue? But that itself.
That's why I made. First of all, that's why I made sure to get Rabbi Shloski to write this letter in the sefer. If somebody didn't think the Birchas Hatzaddik was about my face, the greatest evidence is Rabbi Tzvi Kushalevsky, Rosh Hashiva from the Brisker Mahalach, wrote a letter testifying to the spiritual efficacy of the sefer. So, if the Tzaddik of Rananna was able to pull that off, I think that's pretty indicative. He must be about my face.
That itself is a moifis.
That's, I think, the biggest moifis.
That's like that Meiser of Baron and the Kapishna Sereba. The Baron came along with the Talmud Kapishna Sereba and the Kusheba Ofrim Shirayim, and the Talmud was like a little queasy, and he didn't want to touch the Shirayim. So the Rebbe said, das Kemel sein kein Chassid. So the Baron said, Zog schnell Omen, Birchas Hatzaddik.
Regarding this school, I'll say two things. First of all, this Talmid Chacham Rabbi Yitzchak Naiman, who worked on the Chedushim of Rav Shlomo David Kahana, he said over, and the piece that you selected is a quintessential example where you see he's trying to explain how by Kabbalas HaTorah Hashem is merape the Summa, and then he says Yehi Ratzain that the Rebbeinu Shalom should heal my eyes, as if like he's saying the Torah with like a kavana, with like a tachlis to bring out a certain pu'ula, that namely in this case he should have refuah shalema. You see in a lot of the pieces, one of the pieces he wrote when he was in Siberia, he wrote al yidei this piece, Edom should have a downfall and the Soviets should crumble. Well, sometimes he has like gematrias of Rashi Tevois, Soifei Tevois, very unique and unusual system of gematria where it seems like he's jumping through hoops to get to a certain result, but he clearly had a certain kavana that he was being mechadesh to bring about a certain pu'ula. So the style of the sefer is such that this tzaddik was mechavein to bring Yeshuas for Klal Yisrael. That was certainly his intention in being mechadesh these inyanim. So that's one. Because my ome this sefer to bring Yeshua is more than any other sefer. So one understanding is this particular Talmid Chacham, his kavana in being mechadesh these chidushim were to be payal in certain areas for Klal Yisrael.
Absolutely. I mean, he said, like I mentioned before, Hashem Elisa Osi Min Sha'oli felt he was taken out of the bar in order to be able to bet for Klal Yisrael. And this concept of a tzaddik saying Torah, the Torah actually creating a Yeshua, that is grounded in for sure in Hasidic Svarim. It works both in Drush or Hasidus and also in Halacha. Someone told me a story recently. The Kloisenberger Rov, there was someone in Kiryas Sanz who fell into an elevator shaft and he was in a terrible state. So Kloisenberger went into the sugi of Trefus, wrote a tshuva on the Inyani Trefus, and with that, the Koyach HaTorah of Trefus is going to make this person Ois Trefa. That was like the idea. And the Kachava, the person's walking around today, Ka'echad Mehabriyim. And there's a famous story like that with the Chazon Ish. What with Chazon Ish?
With the Chazon Ish. So somebody had a shaila about a certain lethal treifa, and the Chazon Ish says, the Ramah somewhere says that the treifas Adam and treifas Vahim are similar, and therefore this treifas machlok is mechaber Ramah. You should move to Eretz Yisrael because in Eretz Yisrael the mechaber is more the asher the Eretz Yisrael, and lefi devarov you're not a treifa and you'll survive.
Wow, that's interesting. And there's a story like that for Chaim Volozhiner with the Shagasarya. Also,
Yeah.
that in Volozhin, the Shagasarya had a Mechudish Shita and Treifus, and also so someone with such a situation, Rabbi Chaim Volozhin told him to go to Volozhin, because there the psak is like the Marda Asra, which is the Shagasarya.
Hmm.
And another story that's told also about Tzaddikim is that there was a famous machlokes between the Yismach Moshe and the Chassam Sofer. It was just Chassam Sofer was the entire Oberland, the Ashkenaz part of Hungary and the Chassidish part of Hungary, but gestopped gens. Stays the stuff force-feed geese, and
Right.
that was also Shiloh Trefus. And the Chassam Sofer held it was okay, and then Sigit, the Yitzchak held it was not okay. As a matter of fact, I once said that the Yitav Lev, the grandfather, the Satmarov, he was a grandson of the Yitzchak Moshe. He considered learning by the Chassam Sofer, but because in Preshberg they ate stopped against, he didn't go. And he had Charot. He said he should have gone anyway to learn by the Chassam Sofer, despite the fact they ate stopped against. But this was a big point of contention between the two courts. And so the Chassam Sofer once had a goose that was stuffed goose, and it survived the Yud Beis Chodesh. So he said, "You see that it's not a treifa." Moshe says, "Yeah, because in the Chotzer of the Chassam Sofer, where you paskin it's not a treifa, the goose is going to survive." Hashem came anywhere else, it's considered a treifa. But that's in halacha. But certainly in Inyani Chasidus and Remez and Drush, and I also had that sense that you mentioned that when he's saying the Torah about that the Torah is marpe and the Matan Torah, the Ur is not called down. So Yirtza Aishav a refuah shalema. It definitely sounds like that he means to say that through the saying of the Torah, that's going to accomplish that's a life koyach Torah is able to do that. I can do that. I believe that 100%.
Also, one more nekuda, it's not only in the Oil Machsidus, the Chaim Volozhin and Pirkei Avos brings down the story with the Taz. A woman came to the Taz. She says, "Adonenu David, my son is dying," and the Taz says, "What do you want from my life?" Hasachas Elikim Anochi, and the lady said, "I'm not coming to you. I'm coming to your Torah." And the Chaim Volozhin brings down the Taz says, "Okay, you're right. I give my Torah today to you as a zchus refuah shalema," and the Chaim Volozhiner says immediately the kid had refuah shalema. So I think the way I look at it is like this.
I mean
Be'etzem,
that's general the koyach HaTorah. There's a general
very
koyach
good.
HaTorah.
So here's
But
one of
we're talking specifically talking about the inyan of a mum is going away. We'll take away a mum. We're going more targeted.
yeah.
You're talking about the general
No,
koyach HaTorah. What about the
but
targeted?
I want to explain it relevant to the Tzaddik of Rananna. So I think this is not like a new koyach that Tzaddik of Rananna was mechadesh. Be'etzem, all Torah has a capacity to bring all the brachas ba'olam. So why don't we access it? Obviously, there are a lot of interference. There's interference. There are hindrances. There are blockages. So this particular tzaddik, he was mavtiach that he's going to be mispalel to remove the blockages from the yid and his Torah. In other words, it's not a special thing about his Torah. All Torah has that capacity. The koich of this tzaddik is he's telling you, I'm going to daven to remove the interferences between you and this Torah. That's maybe another take on it. From the story you started with, that his tafkid was halisa min sha'il. Like he has that power to, you know.
But do we have any sources? I'm sure you once gave a share on this that a tzaddik after he passes on still has the ability to daven. In other words, you have this concept, I'm going to daven for you in Shemaim. Do we know that that's possible at all?
Could a
Is there
tzaddik?
a Gemara? Does the Gemara ever infer that a person could go, a tzaddik will daven for someone after he's not alive anymore?
You do have midrashim, tzaddik gedolim tzaddikim b'misasim yasmir chayim. What does that mean? The Medrash in Esther brings that they aroused Avos Ha'olam to be mispalel, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, "I'm going to daven from above," and Mordechai, you daven from below. So you see, that's the Indian of going to a kever.
They were aroused. It sounds like they almost had like Chis Hamesim. They came to life and they were able to daven. Now they're people. But do we find that while a person's an oil emes davening and a sham and shamayim is davening? They say,
That's the, I mean,
right? So he went and he
yeah,
said to get out of your graves and come daven. Why don't you stay in your grave and daven there too?
that's for kivrei tzaddikim. There's a question whether you could ask them directly, right? Mishnah Berurah says you can't ask them directly, but if you go there, they may do it. They could do it. You might not be able to ask them directly. So the tzaddik is saying, I'm letting you know.
The schus of the tzaddik. You're davening for the schus of the tzaddik.
Yeah, that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. That you're down for the schus of the tzaddik. But there are many sources that even though you can't ask them, they do it. They will do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Whether you can ask directly is a machlokes between Mishnah Berurah and the Maram Shik brings from the Zohar. You could ask directly. And we're not noig to do that, but whether you can or not ask directly, they do it. There is definitely such a concept.
There's a chiluk between tzaddikim, which is the Klal Nishmas Klal Yisrael, and malachim, which are not, which are.
Yeah, it's a tshuva nechsam sefer. So, but look, this sefer has tremendous value even without the skula shaba. I'm not asking people to learn this Torah for the skula. The Torah has historic value aside from the Torah value. The sefer has tremendous historic value. It's preserving chidushim from Rabbi Yaakov Mordechai Bulgarai. It's preserving chidushim from the Ger Rebbes that are not in print even, from the Beis Yisrael or from earlier Ger Rebbes. It's preserving chidushim from Shem Shmuel. So that's another aspect of. In fact, one of the haskamas on the sefer is from Rav Ram David Mandelbaum, who's the Yoshev Rosh of Zikaron Chachmei Poilen, of Mechoin Moireshes Chachmei Poilen. So that's another dimension of the sefer.
It also should be noted that we didn't talk much about the sefer. That the sefer is very unique in that it's divided up in parts. He actually marked off what's pshat, what's remez, what's trush, and what's side. He has very nice halacha pieces. If people learned that Yomi recently, the Gemara learned that in Chulin Lef Chav Zayin, the Gemara said that the dogim don't need shchita because it says it's called the Gehayam Ya'asef Lohem. So you don't need shchita. So he tells the over here, it says im es called the Gehayam Ya'asef Lohem. What's the es? It says Tosfos in Masechtas Avodah Zarah talks about that chagovim are also like fish. They don't require any shchita. You just kill them and you eat it like that. That's you quote say something Avodah Zarah Daf Lamed Chestam and Aleph. So he says that's the S. The S, if you learn that from the pasuk, is called the Gehayam Ya'asif Lahem. That Masifa Ba'al Masag. You don't have to have shchita for a dogim. So the S of the Rabbis Chagovim. That's a very nice. He calls it pilpul, but it's a nice shot. It's a nice shtickle Torah. He has more elaborate pilpul, but this is like a short one. That's in Parashas in next week's Parasha Ba'aloischa. Actually, for him, it's this week's Parasha because in Eretz Yisrael, it's Parasha Ba'aloischa now.
Yeah. So. Look, this coming year is going to be the 50th yard side of the Tzaddik of Rananna. It's interesting how all these decades have passed, and the sefer, the 3-volume sefer, is not very available. And I think the interest in Tzaddik of Rananna has really grown a lot, so to speak, suddenly now. So, everything has its time in history. Every tzaddik, every sefer has its specific mazel. When it's nisparse and when people focus on it, and it should be lahagdol Torah la'adira.
Yeah, you should also. People don't. I don't know if anyone realizes what exactly is the makeup of the sefer. The Ben Lashri is a 3-volume work, and the Birchas Hatzaddik is what was collected from Rabbi Glatstein's shiurim. That it's a curated collection of the pieces that you felt the Shavuot Chal Nefesh, and people are able to gain something out of it. And from that was comprised of Likut. It's really not the original Seder. The original Seder was Ben Lashri, but this is a selected pieces, itself a nice volume, of Birchas Hatzaddik that people are able to enjoy and gain from it, whether it's Mshat, Remez, Drush, and Side. There's even Side, but the Side is lighter Side with some notes that explain it a little bit better. And the Mutz is Gevaldig Musa. And I find the Hasidic lessons, again, it's my personal feeling, of the typical classic Hasidic lessons of Bittul Hayesh, Nachnu Mo. It talks about the person shouldn't fall. He's a fascinating thing. He says, a Nazir can't drink wine, so he's devoid of all joy in life. He has to have long hair, which is a sign of Avelus. So he can't come Kamamish to Marish Chayra. So he can't go to Levayas either because he'll come too much Marish Chayra. A person has to have a Simcha that's at less of Simcha for Hasidus. All the classic Hasidic lessons are here also. But if we're going to, it looks like we're about to wrap this up. There's one thing I have to mention because it's something personal for me. He talks about in Yisa Shempanav Lecha. Also, he mentions that the famous thing all the Darshan talk about. Says Lo Yisapon Animat V'Chalta V'Savot V'Rachta V'Emedagdik L'Atzmat Kazayis Vat Kebeya. He says, what's the remez of the word at kazayis? What's he says al derech remez? What does it mean at kazayis? He says that at kazayis u parnosa meroira kazayis. Now Mechoin Alizayis is called Alizayis for a very interesting reason. The first time I had to
One
give an
second, one
official name.
second, one second. Interesting reason. This is not rocket science. I mean, we know your last name is Shemen, no?
No, that's not the reason. That's
Come
not the
on.
reason. No, and that would have been Shemon's eyes. No, that's not the reason. The reason is because it's just a funny story. I needed to quickly come up with a name. I said, what am I going to call? What am I going to call this thing? So I said, I live in a neighborhood in Lakewood called Albert. Albert
Yeah.
Yiddish is Albert is Azayas. Azayas is an Albert in Yiddish. The Al
No.
is the blessed from Zayas. But when I told my mother, by the way, I gave it a name. She says, "Oh, Rashi says in Chumash that Ali Zayis Taraf Befio Mutav Shim Zenois Miyad Kodesh Baruch Hu Merurim Kazayis, and not to be Miyad Basar Vadam." It's the best name for a business. So Pella, no one ever thought of it before. It's the Parnasa should come. So I said the Pirush is Kazayis, so Parnasa Merurim Kazayis. But I can say that when I'm dealing with Rabbi Glatstein, it's sweet as sugar. It's not Merurim Kazayis. Other people take care of that. But your Svara makes it very. Actually, it should have been called. Should have called the Vash Misela. It should have been called
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Stella, meaning the Stein of Glatstein.
Ah, very it's mutual. Thank you for the partnership, and it's a zechus to be able to disseminate the chidushim of this tzaddik. I will tell you, putting all the questions aside, let me just tell you the facts. I got a message last night at tell you exactly what time. At 1 something a.m. I'm gonna tell you exactly what time. I got a message and I haven't heard from this guy in at least 6 months. Good evening, Rabbi. Just wanted to share with you great news. If you remember, we met on the flight to Eretz Yisrael when you went to the yard site of the Tzaddik of Rananna, the 49th yard site. For some odd reason, Hashem put me on the same flight. I was sitting next to this guy. I don't even know why I went to Eretz Yisrael. You told me the reason for your trip. I was going for the yard site of Tzaddik of Rananna and the fascinating story of Rav Kushalevsky. I told you I have a cousin. I'm not going to say where. I don't want to, maybe for privacy, who is married for over a decade. Let's leave it at that. That doesn't have kids. While on board, I texted my cousin to contact you to join you when you were davening at the yard site tomorrow, Friday. He joined you in the Beis HaChaim. He called me after how beautiful and emotional it was. Now, as I'm typing this, I'm in this place for another simcha, and I got the great news that she's expecting, and she's in her 4th month. I'm in tears for emotion. How Hashem used me for this shlichus to bring this together. No comment.
Beautiful.
No comment.
You forwarded that message to me earlier today.
I did.
And I want to there's one prat that you should have added also, I may say,
Okay.
that in the message it also says that this cousin wasn't supposed to be in Eretz Yisrael, happened to be in Eretz Yisrail all the time as well. That's another thing. But Afal Pekin, it doesn't change my position.
Good. Mine either, But one thing for sure, right? Both of us are in the book selling business, and it sure doesn't hurt, so.
Absolutely. Good. Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time.
Very good.
Continued
Hatzlacha.
hatzlacha.
Wonderful. I really enjoyed it. Shkoyach.
Okay, hatzlacha, Rabbi. Thank you very much.